As we speak, Ryan Nembhard is in Spokane on a visit with his brother Andrew before heading to Tucson to visit Arizona. Do the Zags have a chance here? Let's discuss.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to give you daily reports through another season of Gonzaga Hoops. Today's episode is finally our Zags in the NBA season recap. We have not done so yet. We've been so focused on the transfer portal and various players leaving, declaring for the draft, etc., etc. But today, in the closing segments of the show, we are going to discuss all 8 Zags in the NBA. Tremendous amount of success for those guys, especially late in the season. For anybody who maybe lost track of how our Zags were doing at that level in the last month or so, I got some fantastic updates for you. We'll get to that, but we have to lead today's show talking about Ryan Nembhard, the top, or one of the very, very top transfer portal targets for every program out there. He has been strongly connected to 2 programs in particular, the Gonzaga Bulldogs and the Arizona Wildcats. Lloyd, the battle continues. In this case, of course, battling over Andrew Nembhard's younger brother, Ryan. What we know right now is that over this weekend, Ryan Nembhard is in Spokane visiting Gonzaga. He is talking to the coaches. He's talking to the players. He's doing the whole visit thing. His family is in town. That includes his brother, Andrew, who, of course, played for 2 years at Gonzaga, has had a tremendous start to his NBA career. We will, of course, get to that later in the show. We know that after Nembhard's visit in Spokane, he is going to Arizona. Nembhard, his brother Andrew, is going with him. They're going to go visit Tommy Lloyd. They're going to visit Arizona. And then presumably he will make a decision from there, whether he's picking just from those 2 schools, whether he goes on other visits, what happens after that. A bit unclear at this point, but I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Gonzaga and Arizona are the 2 finalists here. For a reminder on who Ryan Nembhard is, we'll get that ironed out, I'm sure, in time. Ryan Nembhard, 2 years at Creighton with the Blue Jays. Incredible production there. His freshman year was cut short by an ankle injury. His second season was absolutely fantastic. 64 total starts for Nembhard in 2 years with the Blue Jays. Last season, 12.1 points per game, 4.8 assists, 4 rebounds. He played 34 minutes a game last year. It was a bit surprising to see him even enter the transfer portal, because most players who play 34 minutes per game on a team that goes to the Elite 8 aren't exactly looking for a new school, a new opportunity. Nembhard is in that camp. He's looking for something else. Again, really productive player for Creighton, 48.2% on 2-pointers, shot just under 36% from 3, had a monster performance in the NCAA tournament, particularly against the Bears of Baylor. We're not going to pretend that Baylor was an elite defensive team last year, because they were not, but still, Ryan Nembhard put up 30. Anybody who can drop 30 in an NCAA tournament game is well worth keeping an eye on, especially a guard, because it's not a secret that Gonzaga's guards struggle to score really all season long, but in particular, they really struggle to score in the NCAA tournament. Having a guy like Nembhard who could turn around and drop 30 on 4 of 6 shooting from deep, going 10 of 10 from the charity stripe in that game, that's the kind of thing that could have elevated this Gonzaga team from being a team that snuck into the Elite 8 and got waxed by UConn to a team that perhaps could have made a Final Four run or even better. The connections here are obvious. It's worth pointing out that Tommy Lloyd was the primary recruiter for Andrew Nembhard when he initially went to Florida, and when he entered the transfer portal, ultimately ended up deciding to come to Gonzaga for 2 seasons. So the connection between Andrew Nembhard and Gonzaga is very strong. The connection between Andrew Nembhard and Tommy Lloyd is very strong. What that means for Ryan Nembhard kind of remains to be seen. He is his own person. I don't want to say that whatever connection Andrew has that's stronger is necessarily going to be the driving force for Ryan. That's not how it works. They're different people. They're different humans. They have different wants, needs, desires, expectations, all of that good stuff. But it is worth pointing out that Andrew Nembhard's connection is deep to both Gonzaga and Arizona right now, and that could have an impact on Ryan. When Ryan Nembhard first entered the transfer portal, all of the conversation was about Arizona, to the point where Creighton fans and analysts and people on Twitter were outright accusing Tommy Lloyd and Arizona of tampering, of things that aren't against the rules, which I think I said this at the time. Everydayers might remember this conversation when we first talked about Ryan Nembhard last week, but Tommy Lloyd, you can't accuse him of doing anything wrong if he's not breaking any rules. I don't know what conversations had happened, were happening, are happening, any of that conversation, but it's kind of the Wild West. There's not a lot of rules right now about trying to recruit players and tampering and all that stuff. Eventually, I think the NCAA will tighten the screws on this and maybe make this less chaotic as it is right now. But the fact that Ryan Nembhard has not committed to Arizona yet is probably not a bad sign for the Zags. It's probably not a bad sign. The Zags being the first visit, I think people put a lot of stock into this, and I don't know how much it necessarily matters. I would say if given the choice between being the first school that somebody visited or the last school that somebody visited, I think I'd want to be the last school, assuming that the player is going to visit every school. There is a chance, I will say that I think this is a slight chance, but there is a chance that the Zags pitch to Ryan Nembhard is so successful that he chooses not to even visit Arizona and commits on the spot to Gonzaga. I think that is very, very unlikely. That doesn't mean I don't think Gonzaga will necessarily land Ryan Nembhard, but I think he's going to go check out Arizona first. He's going to go on campus. He's going to talk to Tommy. Him and Andrew are going to check it out. They're going to talk to the players. They're going to talk to Umar. They're going to talk to other guys currently on that roster, Pelle Larsson, etc., and kind of get a feel for everything and then make their decision. Do I think Arizona has a slight advantage by being the second program that Ryan visits? Yes. There are other reasons that I think Arizona might have some advantages. They have a little bit more of a secure roster right now. Having said that, Azuolas Tubelis, their best player last season, one of the best players in the Pac-12, one of the best players in the country, at times was legitimately a contender alongside Zach Edey and Drew Timme and Oscar Tshiebwe and Trace Jackson-Davis for the National Player of the Year. Nobody really ever caught Zach Edey in that conversation, but Tubelis was a part of that conversation. He has declared for the NBA draft. He's not quite the same player as Jackson-Davis or Timme or those guys, but he is a 6'11" big man who is a good rebounder, a good low post scorer, and not a great outside shooter. Those players tend to get overlooked by NBA scouts. Case in point, Tubelis hasn't been a player that shows up particularly highly on mock drafts. He's often in the same range as Drew Timme or Jackson-Davis or Tshiebwe, in the early 50s at best. Oftentimes for like big boards, he's in the 70s or 80s, which is kind of outside of even the draftable range for these players. However, the reports that at least I have been reading on Friday morning here are that Tubelis is pretty committed to playing professionally, and he has not removed his ability to return to college, so he could come back to Arizona, but most kind of believe that he's out the door. So that hurts Arizona's opportunities. If Tommy Lloyd and the staff could pitch to Nembhard, hey, you join our team, you get to throw the ball to Azuolas Tubelis and Umar Ballo and Pelle Larsson. This is your team, this is your group. This is a team that obviously earned a 2 seed last year. They'll probably gloss over what happened after that, but that is a strong pitch. If Tubelis is not there, they still have Umar Ballo, they still have talented players, but they're at least more on par with a Gonzaga roster that right now is fairly unsettled as well. We have been talking about that at length. They don't have any guards back except for Nolan Hickman. At this point, we don't expect Drew Timme's not coming back. We don't expect Julian Strother to come back. At this point, we're no news is probably, I've been saying no news is no news for Anton Watson, and I still believe that, but I do think that the odds of him returning are fairly high. So you get Anton Watson back, you get Ben Gregg back, you have a solid squad to build around. But I do wonder if that ends up being a deciding factor for Nembhard between those two teams. Probably going to lean Arizona there. My expectation all along has been that Ryan Nembhard is going to go to Arizona. It would be an incredible addition for the Zags. I mean, an incredible addition for the Zags. If Ryan Nembhard chooses to come to Gonzaga, we'll have a lot more conversation about what that looks like, what that means, how impactful, how beneficial that is. But if he ends up going to Arizona, I don't want Zags fans to be surprised by that, because I think that that's kind of always been the expectation. At that point, Gonzaga would pivot to two players who have listed Gonzaga in their top fives, respectively. Taron Armstrong actually listed Gonzaga in his top four, a longtime Xavier, Creighton, of course, who needs to replace Ryan Nembhard, and Providence. Stephen Ashworth, we talked about him on a recent show as well. He's a high-level shooting point guard from Utah State. He has listed Gonzaga in his top five alongside Utah State, alongside Washington, alongside BYU, and Creighton. So Creighton is in the competition for Armstrong and Ashworth. Gonzaga is in a competition for Ryan Nembhard, as well as Arizona in that conversation. So the Zags are probably going to land one of these three guards. I feel pretty strongly that they're going to get at least one of these three. I think Ryan Nembhard is unfortunately the least likely to end up in Spokane, but I'm glad he's the one visiting right now, because that's the big fish. That's the one you want. If the Zags can pull this off, boy, howdy, will we be talking about a quick turnaround for what has been a disappointing offseason for the Zags up to this point. Well, 8 Zags balled out in the NBA this season, with multiple guys having the best seasons of their NBA careers. More on them after a word from today's sponsor, Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugar and calories, then you need the best tasting protein bar ever built. Built Bars are healthy and they taste amazing. Seriously, they taste so good you will not think that they are healthy for you. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they are all covered in 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. They have only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box. For years, we have been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, while you can still get your specialty flavors at Built.com. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puff. And if you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, including brownie batter puff and churro puff. You can thank me later. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. And I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen of the day. Everydayers, next week on the show is going to be more transfer portal coverage. One of these 3-point guards ending up in Spokane might happen next week. We'll have all of the coverage on that. We'll continue to look at other players, including Jesse Edwards, the big Syracuse guy who has listed Gonzaga in his top 3. Could he be coming to Spokane? All sorts of fantastic portal coverage coming your way next week. But for now, we are going to do our Zags in the NBA coverage, talking about all 8 players who played in the NBA last year, how they performed this season, what their role might look like going forward. And we're starting the conversation because it makes the most sense as a transition period. We're talking about Andrew Nembhard, the rookie last year, one of the best surprise rookies in the entire NBA season. He played 75 games for the Indiana Pacers, a player that at this time last year wasn't on very many mock drafts. And I think it's worth remembering that. He wasn't a player talked about. Maybe he was in the 40s on some mock drafts, but it took a dominant performance at the combine. His testing numbers were good. At that point, people started reevaluating tape and like, oh, maybe this is a guy who could help us right away. Slipped out of the first round, first pick in the second round, secured the biggest bag, guaranteed money that a second round pick has ever received. And then he more than proved that he deserved that with a fantastic season with the Indiana Pacers. 75 games, like I said, 9.5 points, 4.5 assists, shot 44% from the field in his final 16 games with the Indiana Pacers. Andrew Nembhard, 15.3 points, 6.8 assists while shooting 43% from deep. Incredible season. We talked about some of the really great performances he had early in the year. He had that game-winning 3 over LeBron James against the Lakers. He had that near 30-point triple-double against Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Finished the season on a super high note, is very likely in the coming days to be announced as an all-rookie, probably second-teamer, but still for a guy who, again, in April of last year wasn't considered an NBA draft pick at all, and now he's likely going to be an all-rookie second-teamer. Tremendous year for Andrew Nembhard. He did it in part because of Gonzaga. I'm going to remind everybody of that in case Ryan Nembhard or somebody affiliated with Ryan Nembhard listen to the show. Guess what? It sure worked for your brother. It could work for you as well in Spokane. Next up, Jalen Suggs, sticking with the young guards. Out of Gonzaga and in the NBA. Jalen Suggs had the best season of his NBA career as well. Granted, it was his second NBA season and really his not fully healthy, but closer to being healthy season for him. He has just had some really bad luck with injuries early in his career. Suggs played 53 games last year. This past season, I should say, he averaged 10 points, 3 boards, and 3 assists per game. He shot 32.7% from 3, which is not great, but it is a significant improvement from what he shot as a rookie, which was 21.4%. It is also worth pointing out that Suggs was battling injury stuff early in the year, and across his final 26 games, which is half the season that he played, he shot 38% from deep. If you're an Orlando Magic fan or just a Jalen Suggs fan, I hope many of you are Jalen Suggs fans, that is incredibly encouraging for what he is capable of becoming. I don't think Jalen Suggs has even scratched the surface of his potential, at least offensively, as an NBA player. Defensively, he has already proven he is capable of being one of the premier defensive guards in the NBA. When that offense starts coming around, when the facilitating starts coming around, when the three-point shooting gets more consistent, stuff that could happen as soon as next year. I don't think this is a multi-year process anymore. He's got to stay healthy. But if that stuff starts to come around, I think that Orlando fans are going to be real happy with having Jalen Suggs alongside Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner as a really dominant rebuild that's going on over in Orlando. Next up, Corey Kispert for the Washington Wizards. Corey Kispert, hey, guess what? He had the best year of his NBA career as well. Again, not a very lengthy NBA career up to this point, but still fantastic to see what Kispert was able to do this past season in Washington. 74 games played, averaged 11.1 points per game, 2.8 rebounds. He shot just under 64% on two-pointers. For a guy that was labeled as a three-point shooting specialist without a lot else, that was kind of the knock on Kispert of he's not a super high-level athlete, he's not an elite defensive player, he's really just a three-point shooter, and that is his primary skill. We're not going to pretend it's not, but he shot 64% on twos. He proved he can get to the rim. He's got a mid-range game. He has the ability to score in multiple different ways. He also shot 42.5% from three because, well, that is still his primary skill as an NBA player. Again, as so many of these other Zags were able to do, Kispert really shined down the stretch of this season for Washington. In his final 15 games, Kispert averaged 17.4 points per game while averaging 3.1 rebounds per game as well. We've seen him take on a bigger role. We've seen Washington get more and more comfortable letting him kind of handle more responsibility, take more shots, be more of a leader for the team. Washington is not in a good spot as a program right now. It'll be interesting to see how much turnover, how much shakeup we see this offseason, what that might look like. But I think there's a good chance that they're planning on Kispert being a pillar for this team going forward. And after what he did last season, particularly down the stretch, I can totally understand why. Final player we want to talk about here in this segment before we close it out with some more of the veteran guys. We're going to talk about Zach Collins here. And yes, Zach Collins has been in the league a little bit longer than some of the guys we're going to talk about in the final segment, like Rui Hachimura and like Brandon Clark. But I want to highlight Zach Collins here because we've kind of had a theme in this segment of talking about players having the best seasons of their career, and it is unquestionable, indisputable that Zach Collins had the best season of his NBA career, a player who has just been ravaged by injuries throughout his career up to this point, missed an entire season, basically 2 entire seasons with the Portland Trail Blazers before ultimately going to San Antonio, missed most of last season with San Antonio, but this year he was healthy, and he played so good in a bench role that San Antonio, in part because they are tanking for Victor Wembanyama, but they were willing to trade their starting center, Jakob Poeltl, in exchange for salary relief, future draft picks, again, in order to make their team worse, to try to get Victor Wembanyama. But Zach Collins stepped into a starting role and proved he is more than capable of playing that role. On the season, 63 games, 11.5 points, 6.4 rebounds, 2.9 assists. That already is the best season of his career, unquestionably. 57% from the field, 37.5% from deep. But what he did after the trade deadline, what he did after Greg Popovich said, all right, Zach, you are our starting center. Here you go. Keys to the kingdom. Take the role on and show us what you can do. He averaged 16.5 points, 8 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 1.1 blocks while shooting 39% from deep. That is incredible. To be that kind of scorer, that kind of rebounder, that kind of facilitator, that kind of outside shooter. And Greg Popovich, who he doesn't mess around. If he believes you're good, if he's talking about how good you are, he's not gassing you up. He's only doing it because he really believes it. He does not beat around the bush. He does not mess around. Greg Popovich basically said, Zach Collins is our starting center. He earned it. He deserves it. He's going to be that guy. And if this team does land Victor Wembanyama, then he's going to start alongside Zach Collins. And my goodness, having two guys with that kind of length, that kind of ability to stretch the floor, man, oh man, would that be a tremendous, tremendous combination for the San Antonio Spurs. Worth reminding everybody, Zach Collins feels like he's been around for a long time. 25. He's 25 years old. There's still so much potential left in the tank for Zach Collins, and he gave us a really good glimpse of it last season. And more than almost anybody else, and this is a very exciting group of Zags in the NBA, I am so thrilled to see what Zach Collins is going to continue to do, provided he can continue to stay healthy with the Spurs. All right, we're going to close out the show discussing 4 more Zags in the NBA, including a league leader in Domantas Sabonis, coming up right after this. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still locked on Zags, and we're still finishing up the week here talking about our Zags in the NBA, how they performed this past season, what their future might look like going forward. We're going to lead off the final segment talking about the second greatest Zag to ever play in the NBA, the best current Zag without a doubt, and that is 3-time All-Star Domantas Sabonis. Domantas Sabonis was just an absolute machine this past season with the Sacramento Kings. 79 games played. He averaged 19.1 points, 12.3 rebounds, which led the NBA. He was the leading rebounder in the league. He also averaged 7.3 assists, which is just a shockingly high number for a center. So I'll repeat that. 19 points, 12 rebounds, 7.3 assists. He shot 61.5% from the field. The only other player to ever put up those numbers, to reach those thresholds while also shooting over 60% from the field, Wilt Chamberlain. That's it. Those are the only guys who have ever done that. Wilt Chamberlain, a completely different era of basketball for Domantas Sabonis to be able to do that, post that level of efficiency. He led the NBA in rebounds. He was second in the NBA with 14 triple doubles. And what I'm sure matters the most to him, and what I'm sure matters the most to most Sacramento fans, he led the Kings to the first playoff berth since 2006. Season 2 of How I Met Your Mother was going on in 2006, folks. That is the last time the Sacramento Kings made the playoffs. And Domantas Sabonis, not single-handedly, because De'Aaron Fox was very, very awesome, and they have a very, very talented, well-rounded roster in Sacramento, but they don't get there without Domantas Sabonis. He was a monster for them this year. And we talk about how Zach Collins is still just 25 years old. Guess what? Domantas Sabonis is 26. These guys are still so young and still have so much potential to grow and develop as NBA players. Domantas Sabonis, 3-time All-Star, feels to me like he's going to get to 5, might even get to more than that, has had a tremendous, tremendous NBA career. And seeing him lead Sacramento, a franchise that has just been beaten down for so long, seeing him help lead this team to the promised land is an extraordinary story, and one that I think deserves to be celebrated, not just for Gonzaga fans, not just for Sacramento fans, but really across the basketball landscape, because this is a fun time for Sacramento, and they deserve it, and Domantas Sabonis deserves a ton of credit for what he has done to help get them to this spot. Next up, Rui Hachimura. Rui, of course, spent the season split between the Washington Wizards and the Los Angeles Lakers after getting traded just before the deadline to help a depleted Lakers team that needed some reassurance after LeBron James, Anthony Davis were having some injury issues throughout the year and some team cohesion issues, lots of other issues going on in LA. Rui, 30 games with the Wizards, 24.5 minutes per game, 13 points, 4.3 rebounds, and 1.2 assists. He shot 54.5% from 2 and 33.7% from deep. The hope is that the trade to the Lakers would help him maybe have a little bit less pressure on him because there's more superstars around him in LA, and maybe see some of those efficiency numbers come up. That did not end up being the case, unfortunately, for Rui. He played 33 games for the Lakers. He made 9 starts, but he played only 22.5 minutes per game, so a little less than he played in Washington. 9.6 points, 4.7 rebounds. He shot 55.5% on twos, which is almost exactly the same as what he shot in Washington, but he shot only 29.6% from 3. Just didn't quite have the efficiency numbers there. I think most of it was just he took less shots because he had different teammates around him. Not overly concerned about Rui. He's been pretty consistent throughout his NBA career, but it'll be interesting to see how the Lakers figure out what to do with him next year, or if he ends up playing for a different team next year and what that might look like for him. Two more guys to get through today, two more low post presences in the Western Conference. We'll start with the veteran, the old head, the grandpa of the Zags that are currently in the NBA. That is Kelly Olynyk. Kelly Olynyk in his 10th NBA season made a career-high 68 starts last year with the Utah Jazz, 12.5 points per game, 6.2 rebounds, career-high 3.7 assists. You could see Utah start to use him a little bit more in a facilitator role, similar to what Sacramento is doing with Domantas Sabonis. Not to that level. Of course, Sabonis averaged twice as many assists as Kelly did, but still nice to see him kind of adapting his game a little bit and playing a slightly different role with Utah. He shot just under 50% from the field, and he shot 39.5% from deep. He has continued to be an outside shooting weapon for a guy of his size in the NBA. That has been what has kept him in the league for an entire decade. He also finished the season very strong, scored double figures in 14 of his final 17 games. And this is the highest single season points per game that Kelly has had in a season where he stayed with the same team. He scored 13.5 points per game in the 2020-21 season, but he got traded from Miami to Houston during that season and had that tremendous stretch down the final few weeks of the season there with Houston, where I think he averaged like 19 points and 8.5 rebounds. So that boosted his overall numbers. So this isn't the best scoring season of his career, but in a season where he spent the whole year with one team, 12.5 points is his career high. So it was nice to see him end up in Utah, a program that has had a rich history of Zags having success there, of course, with John Stockton being the primary story. And nice to see Kelly have the kind of season that he did. Closing it out, talking about Brandon Clarke for the Memphis Grizzlies. We kind of ended with Brandon Clarke because he unfortunately saw his season end prematurely. He played 56 games, so it's not like he didn't get a good run this year, but then he suffered an Achilles injury that cost him the rest of the season, is likely going to impact him to start next season as well. Finished the year in those 56 games, averaging 10 points, 5.5 rebounds, 1.3 assists. He was shooting a career high 65.5% from the field. And yes, that's a career high, but not by a lot, because Brandon Clarke has just been a high level, high efficient scorer throughout his NBA career. That is who he is. That is what he does. It was unfortunate to see his injury or his season end the way that it did. Clarke has now averaged in double figures in every season of his career. I have no doubt that will continue to be the case, whether he ends up being a long-term piece for the Grizzlies, whether he finds himself in a different situation going forward. It will be kind of a fascinating development to track. But Brandon Clarke continued to be a high-level NBA player, even if he hasn't quite broken out in a significant way yet. Of course, the injury this last year did not help. Didn't have any updates on Chet Holmgren because he did not play, but man, oh man, are we excited to see Chet Holmgren in an Oklahoma City Thunder uniform next season. The Thunder expected to be horrible this year. Instead, they were not. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was awesome. Jalen Williams, shout out Santa Clara legend. Jalen Williams was extraordinary as a rookie. Him and Shai and Chet, oh my goodness. I think this OKC team is going to be very, very good very soon. Chet would make 9 Zags in the NBA, assuming all these guys return. Assuming some combination of Julian Strawther or Drew Timme play in the NBA next season, that's 10. It'll be very fun to be able to cover the Zags in the NBA, knowing that there are double-digit Zags playing professional basketball at the highest level that this game has. Cool story. Cool to see the program continue to develop the way that it has. We will have more Zags in the NBA updates going throughout the offseason and, of course, covering the playoffs, looking ahead to the NBA draft, all of that good stuff. Next week, though, back to the transfer portal madness, talking transfer targets, talking any commitments we may or may not see. We'll continue our season in review series as well, discussing every player on Gonzaga's roster, how they did this past season, what their role might look like next year. That is going to do it for me today and for this week, though. So for those of you checking it out, keep checking out Locked On Zags wherever you get it. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Follow on Twitter, leave a review on iTunes, and hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Have a fantastic weekend. And of course, as always, go Zags.